Well, hello, everyone. This is John Sovek, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for our Out Talk chat today. I'm really excited to have this group of people with us today. It's really amazing. I love hosting these because I am meeting some of the most amazing, interesting, and people are making change in the world, especially for LGBTQI plus people. So I'm glad to have you all here. Just a few things. Pride Month is just around the corner, and we are really excited here at Outcare Health to be trying to showcase all of our providers and patient stories and how they've been positively impacted by Outcare. Reach out to us if you're interested in joining that campaign for more details, and also maybe consider using your employee match program and having Outcare Health mentioned in there so that we can all work together and keep this amazing organization going. Also joining us Monday, April 24th for our free trans non-binary support group. And really exciting news coming up soon. We're going to have some identity focused on Black, Latinx, Asian, APPPI, LGBTQ plus groups, support groups going. If you might be interested in leading one of these groups or joining one of these groups, please reach out. We're always connecting out into the communities. And then, as always, next month, May 18th, we are having our next Out Talk, and that one's going to be focused on being out in corporate America. We've got some really cool guests coming on board, including a very amazing friend of mine, and I think it'll be a really beautiful thing for all of you to join. So please come meet us on May 18th at this same bat time, same bat channel. So with that said, I want us to focus on today's conversation. And we're really looking at the idea of advocacy, activism in the LGBTQIA plus community. We have an amazing panelist joining us today, and I'd like to encourage them to introduce themselves. So by the random luck of the draw, I'm going to have Eden start with us today. And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the work you're doing. And they get this mystery bonus question. And today's bonus question is, you have a week to go anywhere in the world. Where would you want to go? So that said, I'm going to hand it off to you, Eden.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Hello, everyone. My name is Eden Maley. I use she and her pronouns. As you can tell in my handle, I'm currently the field manager for the Leadership Lab, and we're a program in the policy department for the Los Angeles LGBT Center. I'm super excited to be joining and talking on this topic specifically today because this is so key to the work that we do at the Leadership Lab. We've got it in our name, right? Leadership. And so, a little bit about myself and how I came into this work. I actually started as a volunteer with the Leadership Lab in the summer of 2018. And truly, this was work that I had never really engaged with or started doing before working with the lab. So we started, jumping into it, door-to-door canvassing. We were working on a project in Orange County, helping turn out more voters for the midterm election. But what particularly made our work special and unique is the fact that we were using the technique and tactic of deep canvassing, which our program originated back in 2008 during the fight for marriage equality in California. So deep canvassing is designed, is proven through peer-studied and independent studies to be incredibly impactful and successful at changing hearts and minds. So when we were turning out more voters for the midterm election, it wasn't the conventional approach of canvassing, of talking to likely voters. We particularly were talking with folks who were infrequent, less likely to vote, and really helping turn into more frequent and chronic voting behavior. And so this is work that we've been entrenched in for the past few election cycles. And now, because of this pretty unprecedented and dangerous moment we're in for the LGBTQ community, we're really shifting back to our roots, and we'll be embarking for our next project using deep canvassing to talk specifically about LGBTQ related issues and changing hearts and minds around this. So super excited to be here today and share more.
And Eden, you have 1 week. You can
And
go
my bonus
anywhere in the
question,
world.
how did I forget this? Very hard to choose. But I know somewhere that's been really top of mind for me recently. I would really love to go to Greece. Scroll could use a nice Greek vacations.
I have a very good friend of mine who's actually taking a year off, and they're going to be starting that with a month in Greece.
Very jealous.
So I don't know, goals to go for. So stepping up now, Benjamin, why don't you step up next for us?
Sure, thanks, John. Hi, everyone. My name is Benjamin Brooks. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of Policy and Education at Women Walker Institute. Really what this means is that we try to promote leadership. I think in that we are working in several programs to empower folks to recognize their spheres of influence and make the changes that they can see. One of the ways that we do that in our work is through a lot of the, we provide a number of trainings on LGBTQ cultural competency for healthcare providers and social service providers. And at the root of this really is the practice of reflection and awareness of what is within your control. And I think that when we're encouraging folks in this conversation, and as we continue to dialogue, I always return to, where am I giving up power that I actually have? And so this is one of the ways that we look at how I think LGBTQ people in particular are really adept at noticing those invisible strings and walls of power and culture that we have to fight against every day to be our authentic selves. And so we try to bring awareness to the potential, I think, for every person to develop cultural leadership and to create more affirming and welcoming spaces in every area, but in particular in healthcare, where it really matters so much in terms of our access to the rest of life. So I think that's probably enough on that. I'm excited to answer this question because I am like 2 weeks away from a 2-week trip to Japan. And so I am so thrilled. I think and Japan right now is at the top of my wish list, just because of the food. And I'm so excited to just go and eat every little cute thing I can find on the street.
That sounds like a blast. What parts do you know that you're going to?
Well, we have plans right now to visit Tokyo, Kyoto, and Osaka.
Mhm. Beautiful. I actually lived there for about 9 months. It was an amazing journey. I lived in Nagasaki.
Cool, very fun.
Yeah.
We'll have to connect on that later.
Yeah. Okay, there's one more person left on our panel.
Hey, my name's Tavi Han. My pronouns are they, them, and theirs. I am a co-founder of Chords, which stands for Queer Oriented Radical Days of Summer, which is a nonprofit summer camp that was formed by a handful of friends in 2012 in response to, at the time, an anti-gay marriage bill that had passed in North Carolina. And there had been a really big coalition that had formed to fight that bill and worked really hard for a long time. And after it passed, people were feeling pretty defeated. And so a group of friends got together and said, hey, we want to do something that really celebrates queer youth, that celebrates LGBTQ plus families. So what could we do? And we decided to start this week-long summer camp. And it still exists now. It's been virtual the past few years, but every year, a lot of the campers who have aged out of camp come back as camp counselors. And so they get to, start off their leadership path with that. I'm also a speaker and author and have founded other queer ventures along the way and involved in a lot of different things. One of my favorite projects that I work on right now is the Indian Country Trans Echo Project. And what we do is we provide support and technical assistance to all kinds of mental health, medical, any kind of health provider that's working in Indian country, in tribal clinics and urban Indian health centers with trans and two-spirit people. And so that's another thing that I'm really passionate about and do with my time. And I travel a lot for my work, and I have a toddler, so I don't usually get to travel just for vacation. So at this point, if anybody just provided a week trip to a beach somewhere where I just didn't have to move and could just sit there, I would love it. I don't care where it is.
Advocacy and toddler. Yeah, that's a plateful. So once again, my name is John Sovek. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a therapist here in Pasadena, California. And I specialize in working with LGBTQIA+ adolescents and their families during the coming out process. Really exciting news for me. I have a book that's coming out. In fact, after our conversation, I'm going directly to my book launch party. It's called Out, A Parent's Guide to Supporting Your LGBTQIA+ Kid Through Coming Out and Beyond. And this is a really exciting moment, and I'm really proud of this book. And, you know, my focus behind it was when parents at 2 a.m. in the morning are freaking out for the well-being of their LGBTQIA+ kid, they can lean over, read this book, and talk to someone and just work through those fears, work through those anxieties, and find a way to be strong support for their kid. You know, and I think that's something that's really important right now in the environment we are looking at as LGBTQIA+ people. And, you know, Eden, you had mentioned that this time and place. And I'd be curious to hear from all of you, like, yes, we know what's going on, but I also want to hear from frontline advocates. Like, what do you see happening in the world around us right now, specifically maybe here in the United States, and how you think that's affecting the LGBTQ community?
Gosh.
You know, that's definitely a big question. You know, I think where my gut first jumps of this current moment, it's, you know, we're in a moment of fear, and really, you know, people in positions of power strategically and intentionally stoking that fear. And, you know, when I think about the roots of that, you know, it really brings me back to the work that we do at the Leadership Lab, of having conversations with folks that get away from, you know, political arguments and all of these, you know, misfounded talking points that people are fed on a day-to-day basis, and actually really root ourselves in what are our real lived experiences. You know, when we think about our relationships and our values, what are the things that actually are our common ground amongst us? And so, you know, I think that in this moment where even, you know, it feels like a kind of cliched thing to say, you know, here we are, you know, we're even in this room right here, we have folks all across the country, right? We're more connected than ever before, and yet somehow we feel more disconnected. And so I think kind of capitalizing on this opportunity to really dig in and have conversations around what actually unites us and is going to be really, really important when having this type of moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in and maybe add similarly, right, that I think fear is the right word, and that there's a lot of fear and in particular on the side of people who feel that they are being erased or that their place in the world is being usurped. And I think as our messages have to be consistently those of love and acceptance, right? That we have enough room in our movement for everybody, and that everybody means like y'all means all. You know, I have that sticker from the Southern Poverty Law Center. One of the projects that we're working on in our work is with physicians and scientists who work on gender affirming care, in order to provide them with the resources and tools to speak up and to educate their local communities. Because like the fly-in doctor coming into the state doesn't do the deep work that has to be done to address the sources of fear, right? And so what I'm seeing is a lot of the fear is coming from the outside, and the inside the house we're sort of stealing our backs, and then we're reaching out to our communities and I think to our partners and colleagues to find our strength and to make sure that we're connected and united. So I'm encouraged by a lot of this, because I think this is there's a lot going on that is like, we're not leaving anybody behind kind of activity, right? There's a lot of anti-poverty work going on. There's a lot of trans and gender nonconforming rights and access going on, right? The intersex community is as embedded in the LGBTQI plus community as ever before, and their needs are being addressed at the highest level. So I'm seeing a lot of the movement playing a little bit of catch up and doing a pretty dang good job of it too. I'm excited. So I have a lot of hope in response to the fear, but it's also very scary in this moment. I don't want to discount that.
Tabby, you had some thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I always try to do is look at things in context of history too. So what's happening right now is not something that is a new thing that's happening. It's not something that just sparked like that. This is a very long strategic political game that has been being played and a lot to some extent behind the scenes for a number of years. But there has been a lot of, intention and planning and strategy that's been part of that ongoing for a long time. And some of it honestly roots back to at least the 1980s, if not earlier. So I think it's important for us to try our best to look at things in the big picture of time. Erasing trans folks honestly goes back to the days of colonization. So this is not something, again, that just new and kind of came out of nowhere. I think that, it is scary, and we're hearing, I founded a group therapy and training practice that's up in Maryland, and our staff were talking today about just how many of the folks they're working with are expressing so much fear and anxiety right now and just not being sure what to do. And that is real, and the threats are real. And I think, different people experience those differently. But I also know that it's not possible to erase us. It's not possible to put us out of existence. And so that's already lost. That's not going to be successful. And so I really like for us to, as much as we can, kind of learn from historical movements, people who have been through the kinds of things that we're worried we're going to go through, and how did communities come together and support and still resist. I think we have so much room right now for resistance that we've only started to kind of, like Benjamin was saying, kind of get ourselves together now and say, okay, we maybe got thrown off a little bit, but let's come together and move forward. And I think we can do this.
Well, Tabby, I think you bring up a really important point as well, too, that this is a long-term strategic plan to try and erase the LGBTQIA plus community. It didn't just pop up in the last couple of years. I have a very good friend who's a lawyer, and when marriage equality passed, they said, okay, this is actually a really, really tender time for our community because there's going to be a huge kickback against this. And I think what we're seeing now are the waves of that kickback. And it's interesting too, because I think it is powerful for us to be able to speak in the face of all this anger and fear mongering. And I know for a lot of people who are trying to be out there and speak about lived experience and speak about actual studies and information, that their voices are being marginalized pretty strong by these very fear mongering, hate oriented, cherry picking of information. And I would be curious from you on people who are on the front lines, how do you react in that moment? What is your way of being present with that type of anger and fear that's being shown to the community? And as advocates who are on the front line speaking almost every day about this, how do you work through that? How do you stay strong? How do you bring the messages that you're talking about out into the world right now?
That's so I'll sort of speak to this in a I'll say like an evidence-informed way, because one of the great projects that we do, that we did here at Women Walker, is try to understand what makes an effective like training on LGBTQ cultural competency for, in particular for medical providers, because that's what we're talking about, health here. But it turns out that like you really do have to bring people into a place of safety so that they can open their hearts and change their minds. It's extremely frustrating when the person on the other side of that conversation is just wants to talk to me about trans people playing sports, and I have to tell them, like, that's not the issue here, right? That's not really what's going on. We have to get to the root of your bias and why you believe that that's a problem, because of the history of embedded pseudo truths that we have all sort of grown up in, that is called culture. So I try to do, the first thing that I do is try to acknowledge and respect the truths and the history and the expertise that that person brings into their life, so that they know that I can hear and see them as they hear and see themselves. And then I try to get them to do the same thing to me. And then we can step forward together as human beings. I really appreciate what you said, Eden, about the deep canvassing, because I think that the root of it is like known, is being seen and being heard. And then we can walk forward. So it's really rough. That is a really good question, John. I'd love to hear what others have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're really hitting so much on the nail on the head there, Ben. You know, the root of our work of deep canvassing really hinges on this idea of like shared vulnerability. And so I think what was really revolutionary when we started doing this work, you know, I think there was this initial idea, you know, to change minds, you know, all we have to do is, you know, put a face to LGBT issues, right? And, you know, share our stories. And that's going to be enough. And truly, you know, when was the last time you changed your mind about something? You know, was it someone telling you what to do? Or was it you coming to it from your own path of understanding? And so, you know, when we're digging into this, and you know what, I'm really jumping on of what you just said of getting super curious with the person in front of you, getting to those deeper layers. And I'm not going to lie and say it's super easy. It requires a lot of emotional expenditure from us, right? I'm thinking back to a conversation that, you know, very luckily we were able to actually even have recorded from one of our canvassers, and talking about trans issues. And the canvasser in question was talking about their partner who is trans, and their experience, and truly not even getting into the political aspects of, you know, probably the bill that they were talking about, just talking about their relationship. And you know, then exchanging, you know, with the person in front of you. So, you know, tell me about someone in your life, who's someone that you love. And through this conversation, you know, this voter, this constituent, dropped the F-bomb, in front of, you know, this canvasser. And it's very jarring. And a reframe that, you know, with this conversation kind of helped us get to was, this person, as awful and hateful as this moment was, they also really trusted the person in front of them to be honest and share this in that moment. And the canvasser in question, you know, really summoned a beautiful amount of grace and patience and asked, so where does that come from for you? Because here we are having a really lovely conversation. You're listening to me. Where does this come from? And you know what the really beauty of having those moments is really giving someone an opportunity to reflect a little bit deeper, and you know, give that opportunity for some mind expansion. And you know, in terms of how I sustain myself, it's being in community with people in the work. It's taking those beach vacations that I hope Tavi gets a chance to do soon. And really that element of self-care being so important, because this is work that is definitely expends your emotions in real ways.
Yeah, I would say I learned about this probably from the elders and movement leaders who mentored me in learning direct action, about how to really prep to be spiritually grounded before I go into those interactions. And so that's a practice that I have. I have noticed more people intentionally even paying to come to events and spaces with, it seems, the goal to disrupt than I have seen before. So that's happening more in my experience. And so in that kind of setting, if it's a group where there's a training or workshop or presentation and somebody seems really intent on disrupting, and there are other people who seem open and they're trying to, wrestle with the content and stuff, in that case, I'm generally going to shut it down, so that the other people who are open to learning can get that moment, and then offer the other person some one-on-one time if they really want to have the conversation. And I think it's important to do that too, sometimes from a safety standpoint for who else is in the group of people that is having to hear what that person's saying. And then otherwise, I do, kind of what Eden was saying individually, of just asking questions. Who was the first person who you learned this from? I've also learned from the artist and poet Alok Vaidmanan about watching them respond to hate on their page and things. They will respond by saying, "I love you. I'm sorry for whatever hurt has happened to you to cause you to lash out at people like this." And then just says whatever, the thing is, and moves on. And I think that's really powerful. It's really hard, I think, to do that. And I've just kind of been in awe of them being able to do it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that is beautiful. And, both of you, actually, all of you have touched on the idea that in an advocacy role, you also need to make sure you're advocating for your own well-being in moments. And that it is okay to have a voice that steps up, but also have a voice that says, I need to step back and do self-care now, because I too am being triggered. As a few years ago, I actually had a moment where I went through a little bit of an activist crisis where I had to step back because I was not able to find the energy. I was being overwhelmed. Here it comes out. I was being overwhelmed by tears because of the pain of the work. And I just needed to step back for a little bit and do some healing for myself with some beautiful people who supported me in that moment. And, one of the things that I have learned in this work as well is there are all kinds of different activists out there. There are activists. I've had myself described as the kitten with a whip, where I'm very quiet, but I'm very direct. And then I have people that I work with who are they are the loud in your face voices. And there is room for all of that in this advocacy work. And I encourage the people who are joining us today to know that you can be whatever kind of advocate or activist that works best for you and who you are in the world and the community you live in. We all have our own different ways of doing it. And with that said, I do want to make sure and let all of our community know today that if you have questions that you would like to bring to the panel, please drop them either into the Q&A or the chat. I've got both of those open so I can watch. So we can also bring that expertise of community, because from what I've seen, we got people from Oregon to Puerto Rico with us today. And I think there's going to be all kinds of different approaches to advocacy and activism that are out there. But bringing it back to the idea that we are speaking to a medical community today. Let's say you have an office or a clinic or a treatment center or a space where you are trying to take the baby steps to bringing advocacy into your organization. how would you encourage people to take those first steps to maybe be a little bit more present in their community and speak up and become an advocate? Benjamin, you had a big smile on your face with that one, so I'm handing this right off to you.
Oh man, I appreciate that. This is the thing, right? We go to these organizations and these places that they call us when they have a problem, right? So we go in and we look around, and there's usually one person who says, we have a problem, and I'm like, okay, you're my ally. And so I think that's provides a model of okay, look around, recognize there's a problem, and then find your allies. And because as we kind of recognize, if in I think what I'll refer to as your prologue, John, like this work can't be done alone. We can't do it alone, and it's really not safe for each of us to try to do it alone. And so, especially inside of an organization, if you're trying to make change, try to find your allies, become a champion. But one of the ways that we recommend doing it for our work is that we actually want to really key into the organization's own values and goals, right? These are healthcare organizations. They have a mission of keeping people well and whole. And so we key into the way that it is an essential part of fulfilling your mission to address the needs of this community and to be welcoming and affirming of all of your patients. And so this is true of anti-LGBTQ bias, anti-Black bias, right? Anti-immigrant bias. We have to figure out how we can remind people of the values that they've committed to. And if not just the values, then we can remind them of the law that they are obligated to follow. Section 1557 of the Affordable Care Act is still the law of the land, even while there is a regulation pending. And so we sort of take this, like, let's encourage you to do what is best, and then we will encourage you with a carrot and a stick as well. That is kind of the start of it. So find your allies, educate yourself on the way that we can align with the organization's mission and goals. And if you need to, remind them that good cultural competency reduces their legal liability. I'm a lawyer, so that's part of how I frame things.
I like it.
I think you're touching on such an important point here of, discovering self-interest. I think that, posed in a certain way, that can sound like a negative thing, like, oh, someone's only gonna, start making an effort towards advocacy because it behooves them. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's actually pretty crucial towards moving someone towards action of any kind, right? Whether that is, getting an organization like Ben's talking about to be more active, or, building out a team and bringing in volunteers, really getting skilled at and attuned to helping people discover how this is in line with their values, aligned with the mission that they are, purporting to have, is going to be incredibly important to really, moving towards that kind of change.
Yeah, I like to encourage people to start within their own sphere, their own circle, and whether that's your community, your neighborhood, your workplace, the circles that you're part of, and find out what have folks already been doing. Are there people that are already working on this topic that you want to address? And if so, how can you plug into existing work and supporting that? Sometimes I think we kind of jump in and start doing something, and then somebody else may already have been doing that, and we could have just kind of joined together. So how can we do that? If it's, if it doesn't exist, you may create it, and you may look for the people that are going to create that with you. And then also just throwing out the notion of perfection. It's not a real thing.
Amen.
Don't let that thinking you have to know how to do everything or do it right or something stop you from taking steps. But just do something.
Well, Tavi, I think you bring up a really good point there, that people are so afraid of doing it wrong that they're not necessarily doing anything. And maybe, like you're all saying, look within your organization. Perhaps at the beginning, it's just monetary donations to causes that are important to you. Maybe the next step is we're going to be a little bit more visible and we're going to march with that group in a pride parade or show up at their events. Maybe later on, it's like we're going to actually stand in front and speak loudly. We all have to find our introduction point. And I think for organizations, this can be really important to work within the structure to see where that start can happen. We have a really interesting question from Aaron, and I think it is part of this conversation, like how do organizations keep this going? And what Aaron speaks about is how do we balance keeping inclusive people in positions of power and leadership while still having these loud groups who are pushing its non-inclusivity, trying to force those people out of those positions. We're seeing this a lot on the school board level around the country right now. And for me, that's like the first place, like that tricks up for me. But if you look at that question and think about it in your work and experience, how would you address Aaron's concern? Aaron, you stumped the
You
panel.
just, yeah, I think that there's two elements here that I think. One is that if we're asking people who are already multiply marginalized to lead us through this battle, we have to commit to protecting them, like body, soul, and spirit, right? Like so I think that I don't know that it's a balance here, that we're in a fight for our lives in a sense. And so if we're trying to figure out how do we walk the fence and keep sort of compromise happy, I would say that to quote one of these pieces in the chat, we must join together to stand up against this. Yeah, that's a really hard question because so many of our leaders are really vulnerable right now.
And I think it touches on what a lot of us are taught in a lot of different ways, that we have to compromise and we have to, oh, well, it's presented, and it's presented all the time in the media this way too, that, oh, it's just two groups of people with different beliefs and they don't agree. And so you have to kind of, go with each of them. You have to make sure everybody's happy. When it comes to these types of oppressions, that's not really the response. I think part of the question said something about we have to bend to the will of those people. And I guess my feeling is we don't have to. And I think that is a message that I really would want higher up leadership to really be in agreement around. Because yeah, we can't expect just a few token people in different roles to somehow, just by existing in those roles, cause those people to like stop what they're doing and go away. That's just not really gonna happen.
Yeah, I think having that internal structure to support those vulnerable people who are within your organizations is so vital and important. There was a really interesting meme. We've all seen it. It's kind of funny, but kind of true. It's like, when in the history of the world had the people who banned books been on the right side of history? And I think that's that same thing we're facing now. And to understand that, for myself to step into my authenticity and to hold strong with that and to find the community around me that can support that authenticity.
Yeah, I think if we want to keep these leaders, and we want to respect their sacrifice, we have to stand up.
There's another thing that I saw recently too. Because of the book, I'm doing a lot of media right now, and I've been in some really interesting conversations. Another piece of the puzzle I think that's really fascinating is a lot of these very violent, hatred-filled, fear-mongering voices that are kind of filling the airwaves right now are actually in this really kind of symbiotic relationship with the media, because the media is currently thriving on, like, I get viewers through angry voices. So the angry voices are saying, I'm going to be louder and angrier, and then I'll get more coverage. And then the media is like, yeah, we've got more. And it's this relationship that's just like eating its own tail. I see so many nods right now. Thoughts on this observation?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that comes to mind, which is, I feel like a little related to what we were just discussing as well, is like recognizing that all of these systems that we are working to change um, are created on a foundation of white supremacy, of patriarchy. And so it's, yeah, it's not a surprise to me that our media is just the same. And the idea that, our capitalist society is built upon these structures. And so, it's hard to hold these two things at the same time, of creating change while working within the system. It's something that we really were dissecting a lot within our work at the lab when we were working specifically around this idea of infrequent voters and getting more people in the system. I caught myself, I had like a line that I said for a little while of, 2016 happened. Trump was voted in not because of the 50 million people that voted for Trump or the 15 million people who voted for Hillary, but because of the 100 million people who didn't vote at all. And while there's a truth to that, there's also kind of like a blame in that as well. And it really is important to recognize these designs in the system that are working the way that it's designed. And it's not just, folks not participating. It is because they are systemically disenfranchised, or, what I think is the case for a lot of youth. I count this, I remember being an 18-year-old voter and not being tuned in. My first midterm that I ever voted in was 2018, when I started working and getting involved in this. It's a lack of investment. I felt that way when I was 18, not that I didn't think it was important, but I didn't think I knew enough. I was in that pursuit of perfection, right? And so I think it's I feel like I kind of went on a tangent there, but thinking about how these systems are designed is incredibly important to how we approach this 100%.
I would love to build on that a little bit, because part of this, I was just describing the system. These news media corporations are owned by a group of shareholders and managed by a board of directors that is required by law to increase the shareholder value quarter over quarter. And so they are going to do it. No, like, holds barred, are fighting for more eyeballs. And because we have this short-term view of what it means to add value, we have these rat race sort of, I love that you described the Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its own tail, an endless Instagram reel that is providing me no value, but providing all the value to the shareholders of Meta. And so I haven't quite figured out how we get off that rat race, but I do think that we need to expand the scope of what a corporation is responsible for. And that includes the negative externalities of their behavior. So sorry, I have so much to say about that.
And we have the space to hear it.
Thank you for inviting me.
And Ramon actually just left a comment that I think is really powerful, because I was also part of the HIV pandemic and working through it to create just places that people can get medical care. That this work, it's not necessarily done by governments. It's done by us as individuals coming together and saying, yeah, not okay anymore. having a presidency in the 1980s that wouldn't even address that there wasn't HIV crisis happening in the world, let alone in the LGBTQIA plus community. So yeah, and that right there, I think is the root of this conversation today, that advocacy and activism starts with each one of us here deciding we want to say something. We want to be agents of change in the world. And how would you encourage people who are right on the baby steps? Like, how do they do it? How do they do it?
Well, I'll share how I did it. I had a friend who invited me to my first deep canvas, and I trusted them, and I came and gave it a shot. I think that was something that stopped me from for a long time of getting involved, of not just, not knowing where to start. And so, I highly encourage you, talk to like-minded friends who might be doing some actions, look at organizations that you respect and trust within your communities, that you can get involved in, and really, throw away the notion that any action is too small. I think that what I love so much about canvassing and talking to people in one-on-one conversations is like you see grassroots action happening in like live time, because that's where all of this change happens. It's rooted in individual action coming together with others, and so my first piece of advocacy was knocking on voters' doors. That might not feel good to you, and that's okay. Your first action might be writing a postcard to your elected official, and seeing where it goes from there. But I really think this feeling of no action is too small being really important.
Tavi?
Yeah, I think thinking about your own gifts and how those could contribute to the movement. I think sometimes people, have maybe one or two thoughts in their mind of what activism looks like and is, and helping people think about being creative and what are your gifts. There's a need for so many people and so many gifts in this movement. I believe that in a diversity of tactics, I believe that there are many ways that we are, and many things that we have to be doing at the same time to get change. And that takes a lot of different kinds of people and a lot of people doing different things. And so, I agree with like finding out what groups are doing work in your communities, what is resonating with you, and reaching out and, building relationships. That's really, I think, a theme of this is this stuff doesn't really work if we're not connected, if we're not in community, if we're not building deep with each other. And so build those relationships, get involved, plug in, see how you can contribute. You can start even looking online if that's like the easiest first way for you to do that. And yeah, I think just start somewhere. That's all I have to say on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll add. I love what everyone said. I'll just share my story. I hold a lot of my joy in the future. So that's a problem that I have to deal with in therapy. But that means that I'm thinking about what do I want to be proud of when I look back on my life, and that helps me figure out what I want to do in my day to day. But I'm also a very lazy person who would prefer to sit on my sofa and watch Netflix than do anything else. And so I did the thing that Tavi and Eden described, which is that I looked around and was like, who is doing the work that I think is cool and that I want to be a part of, so that I found a little bit of structure around it, so that I wasn't responsible for coming up with all the answers on how to do it, but that I could be in community with in particular our elders who have done this before and know. So being deeply rooted you can shortcut your learning by going to the places that have been here since the 70s, 80s, and 90s that have been doing the work. so that we are part of a big story and a larger movement.
And I want to ask a quick poll question amongst the four of us. How many of you were brought into your first like action group by a friend? Okay.
I will say this, Aaron Tax of Sage told me the #1 indicator of people going out and doing an action is being asked. So we're all just ready to do stuff. We just got to be asked.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, that I would encourage, like you're saying, if you have friends who are doing activism work, talk to them, let them walk you in the front door. And if you're someone who's already in the community, look for the friends around you who are ripe and ready to walk through that door with you. I think that's another way we do it. There is one, we have just a few moments left, and Ruby put in a really amazing question that I think is important in this conversation. Do you experience leadership burnout, and how do you handle that? I was very
Yes.
open earlier. Yes,
Yeah.
I did. I had to take time away. I had to take time off. I had to make my world smaller and more comforting and really focus on what I needed to do to take care of myself before I could step back out into the world. And now from that, I've learned that is how I have to do it. I have to make sure I'm taking care of myself to be able to take care of others. But have you experienced burnout as well? And how did you manage it?
Ugh, yeah. I mean, I'll just say, when I talked about doing this for the first time in 2018, and in my past life, I worked in reality television as a casting producer, doing very, very different type of work, much less emotionally demanding, much less personal, and obviously much less fulfilling. But this has been a big learning curve for me over the last few years of the importance of putting your mask on first, and realizing if you're not caring for yourself, you're going to have a hell of a time caring for other people. And I had a particular moment that I'll share, during the 2020 election. We had relocated to Pennsylvania, pretty much working 24/7 on this campaign in the midst of a pandemic, and everything that comes along with that. And 2 months before the election, I had a very personal loss when my dad passed away. And it was just really like world kind of crumbling all at once. I'm not exactly sure how I did it, but I did get through the election and needed to take a really a big break. It was about 3 or 4 months that I, kind of signed off for a little bit. And during that time, obviously the personal loss, you can't control those things. And that's life, right? But what I really noticed was how in that particular time too, the only thing that was really feeding me was the work. While it is an incredibly beautiful thing when that happens, it's also not sustainable. And so I'll always, trust in my RuPaul mantra, if you can't love yourself, how can you love anyone else? And it's a really important thing to remember. And I think a big part of that is being able to ask for help when you need it, because recurring theme, we can't do this on our own.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of a periodic thing that comes up. I don't think it's something that I'll have and then it's not going to happen again. And I notice for me, I've found that sometimes I need to change the kind of activism or advocacy work that I'm doing or leadership role that I have, and shift and shake that up a little bit. And that can help with it sometimes. Asking for help, I feel, has been a theme that the universe is like, here, you're going to learn this over these next few years. And so I've gotten a lot better at recognizing when I need to do that, doing it. And I think, again, part of that comes back to being rooted in community so that you have folks who you know and trust. And you can have that reciprocal, like showing up for each other kind of thing. Because I think sometimes in our movement work, there's a spoken or unspoken message that everybody needs to constantly be go, 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 or else you don't care, or you quit, or you're whatever. And I don't think that's sustainable for most humans with all of the stuff that we're encountering all the time. And so being able to, you're like a relay team and you hand off the baton for a minute and somebody else goes, that's kind of how I think of it sometimes in how we do this work.
Mhm. I'll jump in and say I feel like I have, as I like what you said, Tavi, like I've been burnt out, but I feel also I'm 32 years old. I'm not old enough to have done this, but I think many of us actually are. Like we exhaust ourselves, and so the thing that I'll just add is I try not to. I take the work seriously, but try to take myself too seriously in the work. And because I'm not the only one, like none of it is going to be relying solely on me. And if you have that attitude, check yourself, because that's ego and that's going to be really draining. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So I want to bring us to a close for today, respecting your time for joining us. Raymond, I do apologize. We have an open question. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to address that today. I just want to thank you all for sharing from your wisdom, your lived experience, and to know that there are these powerful voices doing this amazing work out in the community. It's been an honor to sit with all of you today. I want to remind everybody who's with us that we do have our next Out Talk. It's on May 18th, and we're talking about being out in corporate America. And I think that's a cool thing that really connects this conversation, like advertising in corporate America and activism there. I think it's really powerful. So I want to thank all of you who joined us today. It was beautiful to have you there with your wisdom and questions joining us. And for our panelists, I am honored to have shared this space with you today. Thank you all so much. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.